background.
I'll just pause.
Right, I think we are ready to go. Good evening and welcome everybody. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Just would like a bit of housekeeping before we start. If you could keep your cameras and your microphones off, that just helps with bandwidth. And the chat box, Tony will invite questions this evening. So when he invites those questions, then please feel free to use the chat box at that point. But if you could refrain until he invites those questions, we'd appreciate it. Before I introduce Tony, I'm just going to tell you about a few CIPD events that are coming through. So in January, we've got your professional development moving through the CIPD grades. We're going to launch another mentoring event early spring and neurodiversity. And a couple of other things that are coming later next year are courage and influence for junior HR staff, how to construct and run meaningful staff surveys, and any questions, face-to-face networking meeting if we are allowed, obviously given COVID restrictions. So I just want to introduce you to Tony Kirtley. Tony's got over 30 years of hands-on HR experience in more or less every sector he's worked with, including some of the really big organisations such as HSBC, Carlsberg. He's also worked with a lot of charities and universities and councils. He consults to many executive teams on advising on HR strategy, as well as supporting HR managers to attract and develop and retain key talent to give them the competitive advantage in their respective fields. He's a fellow of the a chartered fellow of the Institute of CIPD. So over to yourself, Tony.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And I must say it's a real pleasure to be here to be able to chat with you and present some information around strategy. In particular, we'll be looking at HR strategy and how we can help as HR professionals to make that work for our organizations. Very briefly, yes, Dawn, absolutely correct. I've worked with quite a lot of different types of organizations. You can see some of these brands ranging from charities to agronomy companies, recruitment, pharma, and the one thing that unites all of them in the way in which I support them, the kind of work that I do, is that my work is involved in helping their organizations unite and work more effectively together, because they are all people. They are all groups of people, and the more effectively we can get those groups of people to work together, then the more successful those organizations are. So this evening, I'm going to be sharing some information with you, but it's not just going to be me talking at you. I'd like to think that this is going to be more than just a webinar. It's actually going to be interactive. So you're going to get a chance to engage with each other. We will be using Zoom, maybe not to its fullest, but we will be using it a bit to do breakout rooms, and we'll go and have some conversations, come back together. We'll try to have a bit of a break about halfway through. Hopefully this is going to be about an hour, so I'll be done by about 8, but there or thereabouts. So what are we going to cover in the next hour? We're going to have a look at 4 things. First of all, I've been asked to focus on strategy, and in particular, what is it? Now, it might sound like a counterintuitive question, but what I find with many organizations, when I ask them what their interpretation of it is, what their definition of what is strategy, the range of different answers that come back is amazing. And so quite often people are pointing at things that are technically not strategy and calling them that. So I just wanted to be really clear tonight about what strategy is and what it is not, and some of the common sort of misnamings that can be out there. But also we're going to have a think about why do we need strategy and its relationship with culture, which is the big connection to the world of HR, the reason that HR is so important. And we will have a look at the end of this session today at what the next steps are for each of you, not forgetting that, you know, if you come on a webinar or an interactive sort of virtual workshop like this, that ideally it's not just one-way traffic and some information. I mean, that's useful, I'm sure, but really it's most helpful if you, at the end of it, not only have been engaged, but you feel a bit like actually there's been some really useful content there that I actually want to go and do something with. They do say information is useless without action, don't they? So that's really what I'm hoping for you, is that you're able to take some next steps from here. And I'll give you some time at the back end of this session to share with each other what you think those actions might be. I'm also conscious that we might have a range of different levels of HR professional in the room. We may have some people who are fairly new members to the CIPD and in relatively junior roles. We might have some, you know, old hands who have been here a long while who are in quite senior positions. Rest assured, I've got all of your best interests in mind. At the first part of that, I work with Westminster Kingsway College and run their CIPD qualifications. I've got half a dozen or so tutors that I have come and help me deliver CIPD level 3 and 5 qualifications, and we've got over 100 students at the moment going through their brand new CIPD qualifications. And at the other end, as Dawn said at the beginning, I consult with executive teams to get them to strip back what they do to why do we do it, and to go through that sort of vision part of the organization, and then attach strategy for operational performance onto it afterwards. So if you're at that more senior end and that kind of conversation is interesting for you, I've got, you know, there's plenty in this presentation for you. So the question and all of the session tonight is going to have some interactive elements to it. So let's get straight into that. Let's do something that's a bit interactive. Let's look at this first question. So what is strategy? Now, in your mind, you'll be having thoughts about that. And I'm going to immediately dive into creating some breakout rooms. There's approximately 30 of us in here. So I'm going to divide you into a handful of breakout rooms. So let's create those now. So if we've got, let's have a look, let's do 7. Let's do 7 breakout rooms. That means there'll be 3 or 4 of you in a room. That means that as we create these rooms, you'll be able to dive into them. And we're just going to spend 5 minutes asking this question and seeing what our definitions are. And it would be nice when you come back if one person from each group on behalf of your group can share in just one sentence what your definition of strategy is into the chat space. So I'm going to pop you into the breakout rooms. Now there'll be 3 or 4 of you in each room, so it shouldn't take too long. You've got 5 minutes. It's just coming up on 7:10. We'll come back together just before 7:15. So the rooms are open now. See you back here in about 5 minutes. Off you go. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Hopefully that was an interesting conversation. And one of you, hopefully, will be able to, on behalf of your group of 3 or 4 of you in a room, be able to share into the chat space now a sort of summary sentence. What's your definition of what strategy is? And whilst you're popping these thoughts into the chat box, I just want to share a picture with you that explains why we're doing this. And it's an old picture of how, if you were to ask, the old fable goes, if you ask 7 blind people to describe an elephant and you stood them next to a different part of the elephant, each of them, as they're reaching out and feeling it to understand what's in front of them, may give you a completely different description of what an elephant is. And in my experience over the last 30 plus years of working in the world of consultancy to executive boards and operational management teams, has been that as soon as you mention the word strategy, it can confuse people because different people have different views and opinions of what it is. And to bring that idea alive, this exercise was designed just to get you thinking and sharing perhaps what you'd like to share. So let's get those into the chat space now. One sentence, if you can. What is your definition of strategy? What is it? Rachel, thank you for the first group you're sharing there. I can see yours was a longer term plan of actions which we want to achieve. So thank you for that definition. Breakout room 3, thank you very much to Liz. Yours was strategy is the big long-term goals and the plans on how to get there, i.e. which direction is the ship going in? Yes, as opposed to how do we, fire up the engines. Becky, a goal or a number of goals to be achieved by a number of actions. And Katie, strategy is the way the business aims to operate to achieve its mission whilst following its vision and values. So lots of management words coming in. Longer term action plan to bring together the company's common goals to achieve. Yeah, thank you, Zoe. So lots of good definitions. Are there any more to come, or are we done there? If another one pops in, I'll call it out. But ultimately, what we're talking about here sounds like we're all in the same kind of zone. If you look on Google, the definition is very clear. It is a plan of action designed to achieve long-term or overall aim. So it is kept as simple as that. But if we're going to drill into, well, okay, that's really broad. Let's get some detail into it. Then this idea of it being an overall plan of action can become a subjective term, and it can depend on who you ask. So I'll give you an example of that. And I broadly find with organizations, you can ask at sort of broadly 4 different levels, depends on the size of the organization to a degree, but let's give you an example of how this plays through. So if we are looking at the highest level in an organization, and by that I mean the widest looking part of the organization, at the executive level, their consideration, their focus is at an organizational level. How do we as an organization sit within our industry? So it's an industry or sector view. Now, the picture that I've got here demonstrates you might have a particular sector that's got, for example, 3 major companies in it: company X, company Y, company Z. And the top executive in that company may be looking at their performance against the other 2. So in this example, if we said our company was company X, this individual might be looking at company Y and company Z and thinking, how are they doing? How can we, beat them? I think I've used the word, who do we want to crush, is an old adage that Nike used when they were first growing up in the 1970s. And the strategy was, we simply want to crush Adidas. They identified their competitor, and everybody's mindset, it unified them, wanted to produce better product. They wanted to get closer to their customer. They wanted to operate with greater excellence in the organization. And so this was the type of language that was used to create this really competitive edge in that organization. So this is what at top level strategy might mean. It's like, how are we going to compete with our competition? If we come down a level, so if we took company X and we zoomed into that and we actually went inside company X, we might find inside that company there are a number of different business units. Sometimes they're in different countries or different regions, but ultimately any one of those business units may have a general manager or a role of that sort of ilk, and their view of strategy may be different. It may be inward looking towards their business unit to say, we're going to operate the very best business unit. So already there's a difference in what strategy means to that person compared with the executive who's got this broader industry focus. But it goes deeper. If we go into, suppose company X was made up of business units A, B, C, and D, you can see I've highlighted here, just for example, business unit B. Let's zoom into business unit B, and what we might find in there is that there's a whole bunch of departments inside business unit B. And for example, if we looked at the sales and marketing team, the head of marketing and sales might say, well, our strategy is to make sure that we're marketing and selling our product or our service in a way that brings in the business for the company to be able to operate. You know, without us doing our job, there's not going to be a business. So they see that really important, and they focus right in almost on operational, what we might refer to as KPIs, targets, goals, that kind of stuff. So if we ask that person, the head of sales and marketing, what their strategy is, it might be about how they're going to go about ensuring that they hit the numbers that they need to in order to perform well as an individual department. And then we can go one final level even deeper. So if we now microscope right in on the sales and marketing department and we ask, what is strategy? We may find that, you know, the marketing department is made up of, you know, different sub desks, actual roles, you know, that have got job descriptions. And for example, here I've picked out, for example, a channel manager who might be thinking about targeting prospects through different social media or what have you, different campaigns. And so their strategy, if they're asked, what do you think strategy is? Well, the strategy at the moment is I've got to be focusing on this and I've got to be focused on that, and TikTok, or, you know, whatever the social media might be. That's their world of operation. So you can see from the heading of this slide, what I'm suggesting is that when we say the word strategy and we ask the question, what is it? We very often end up with many different views and opinions. And so really the issue here is that none of them are strategy in the technical definition. And the reason for that is because they are operationally focused. So how do we go about creating a strategy that's not operationally focused? It's about the long-term direction of travel that the organization wants to head in. I like the comment, I think, that Liz, you mentioned about it's the direction the ship's going into. Maybe even further than that, you know, what's the destination it wants to reach? What is, and it may never, but where does it want to get to? And so there is, if you go back to the textbooks, a very simple but widely taught model, 3 points to it, that sits on virtually every MBA I've ever looked at. And the 3 elements that make up an organization's strategy must allow that organization to at least be able to compete. And we're going to come back to what do we mean by compete in just a moment, but let's give you these 3 strands that will allow your organization to be able to compete. The first is that it has great product or service, and the organization has to decide you know, to what degree does it want to be the product leader or the service leader. Think, for example, if you will, you need to choose. If you're a supermarket, do you want to be an Aldi, a Lidl? Do you want to be a Sainsbury's, a Tesco's? Do you want to be a Waitrose? What do you want to be as a supermarket? Where do you want your product and your service to sit? So that's what we mean by product leadership. You don't have to be the best in class, but you have to choose where do you want to sit on that scale. Is that going to be the strategy you're going to fight for? The second part, not just about your product or your service, is to do with your customer intimacy. So whereas if we're looking at how much of a product or service leader do we want to be as an organization, the answer to that comes from how we differentiate our product or we differentiate our service. With customer intimacy, it's all about connection. It's not about strategy. It's actually about the responsiveness to our customers. I'm sure you've all been on, you know, holidays or into a retail shop where the experience that you had was excellent or a disaster. And we all know that we go and tell 10 people, don't we, on average, about either experience, which has a damaging or an uplifting effect on those organizations, depending on whether we've had a great experience or otherwise. The third part of what makes strategy is operational excellence. And there, what we're looking for is as most effective and efficient use of our resources, including the people that work within our organization. So we'll all know terms like employee engagement, and when we do surveys like that, if we've got great levels of employee engagement, then pretty much there's a correlation with how efficient and effective our organization runs. But have a look, just step back for a second, have a look at these three areas and just consider for a moment how impactful the HR function at the highest level can affect these. HR has the ability to affect all three, and that's quite a unique position to be in. We have the ability to help our organization differentiate our product to deliver the best product and service. We have the ability to ensure that our customer service is second to none, delivering the best total solution. And HR also has a very good handle on driving up good performance management, continuous improvement, and all of that good stuff to become cultural so that our organizations operate at the most efficient level, delivering the best total cost. So if that's true, then what we're able to do as HR is to help our organizations be as competitive as possible. And I'm sure you've all seen Porter's 5 forces model. I'll put it on screen briefly for a second. Let's just do that now. There we go. So the objective of creating really good strategy is to be able to allow us to compete, but it's also to allow us to be competitive as our market forces are changing. And there's a great example that's going on right now. One of my clients recently operate in the energy sector, and they have found themselves having run a brilliant HR strategy to get their people united and, delivering great product and service and, all being on board. The customers loved them. They were growing rapidly. Their operational, sort of efficiency was really high. They were looking really great, fantastically run organization. And yet they went bust only yesterday. And the reason for that was because completely outside of their control, the cost of the energy that they were having to buy to be able to provide to their customers was having to be bought at prices they simply could no longer afford. Ultimately the finances just run out. Now, you could argue, well, surely then that organization should have had better foresight as to what was coming, but I don't think anybody could have predicted what's happened to energy prices. And so sometimes, even with the greatest will in the world, these threats that come in can undermine even the best HR strategy, even the best strategy for an organization. They can cause us, unfortunately, to find ourselves in difficulty. It's not a certain world out there, is it? And so this model really shows us what that can feel like. There's a lot of change going on in the world, has been for the last 18 months more than ever before. But that story I've just shared with you has played out quite clearly, where up until now, the organization I'm talking about were making some small incremental changes to their business. They were introducing, new roles, new departments, growing the number of people working there. They were offering new products and services, making some changes to their IT and the systems that they had internally for doing their HR. So all of these little steps that you can see here were simply looking to keep up with that dotted green line. And what that dotted green line is the amount of change going on around them. And their competitors were experiencing that change as well. What happened here, and what happens to many organizations, is if we're not able to keep up with that dotted line, and that's what happened here, that dotted line changed so rapidly that the incremental change line couldn't keep up with it, we then enter a state of flux. The only way out of that is to make a dramatic change. They might have perhaps, for example, been able to get a huge loan to see them through that period. But if not, then that state of flux leads them to a point where they're going to go out of business unless they can find a transformational intervention to allow them to survive. Another good example of this would have been with car manufacturing, for example. When I was a youngster going to school, if your parents pulled up outside the school in a Skoda, you would get laughed at, because Skoda was a failing Eastern European car brand that you were embarrassed if your parents turned up in one. But Volkswagen back in the 90s saw an opportunity in the market to premiumize their own brand and purchased Skoda and took it through that transformational change. They changed it completely. Skoda was looking likely to go out of business. It was in a state of flux. It was failing. And Volkswagen purchased it and transformed everything from the board to the manufacturing processes. They changed the marketing campaign, everything, the design, the lot. And lo and behold, we have Skoda now as an award-winning car brand that's very competitive in its market. So that's really what we see going on in organizations. And we have to try to create a plan to keep up with the dotted line, to keep up with the change that's going on around us. Obviously, that change is different for every organization. It's different for every industry. But that's the principle of strategy, is that we have to continually keep our eye on this dotted line and to look at what have we got to do to improve. So that allows us to make a plan. And keeping it really simple, that plan, the word plan, essentially is what strategy is all about, a long-term plan to allow us to be successful. So a quick consideration for you then, another bit of interaction. Having explained this contextual model for what's going on in the world, and strategy is really how do you try to make a plan so that your organization stays in business and is successful. Where do you think your organization is? And be interesting to see, do you think, pop it in the chat space if you can now, is your organization in the incremental stage of change, which is where it's just about keeping up, it's competitive, but it feels quite hard work? Is it in the step change where it's maybe, you can see there in that picture, it's got a little bit of an advantage, it's ahead of the curve slightly? You might say Apple went there when they first launched the iPhone and they got a competitive advantage. Is it really in a challenging situation where questions are being asked as to whether we're going to survive or not? I'm just looking at the chat space and I'm seeing so many organizations are going, we're in a state of flux. It's really challenging right now. And understandably, you only have to look at the news daily to see how challenging the world of work is right now, and businesses struggling to make sense of what's going on in the world. Or is your organization in a stage of transformation? Now, obviously, we're together for an hour. I run leadership and management development programs to help equip the leaders and managers of those organizations, with an accreditation to the Institute of Leadership and Management, but also the skills and the knowledge to be able to lead more confidently in their organizations. And we, in those programs, over a few days, spread over a few months, typically we'll talk this stuff through in depth. For tonight, we haven't got the time to do that, I'm sorry to say, but it is really interesting if you look at the chat space to see how many of us are in that state of flux. The NHS seems to have been in a permanent state, Steve, doesn't it, of transformation, probably for the last, 20, 30 years, certainly since austerity has been creeping in. So yeah, I take your point in there. Good to see that we've got someone in most of the stages. I'm going to come to just a couple of you and just ask a quick question, because I think it's interesting. We've got a couple of organizations in the step change space. So Sharon and Liz, I noticed that you said step change. Kat, I think you did too. If you don't mind, just in no more than sort of 30 seconds or so, could you come off mute, perhaps in that order? Sharon first, it would be great to hear from you, and then Liz, and then Kat, if you don't mind, and just share with us a little bit of what that feels like to be in an organization that's in step change. Would you mind, Sharon?
Sure. Yeah, so I think for us, I won't reveal who I'm working for because I'm contracting for them, but I've been there for a year, and I think it's a situation where the organisation probably thinks it's in transformational change space, but actually there's some huge change taking place, and transformational change isn't happening yet. There's a feeling across the organisation, in different parts of the organisation, that big step change is happening, but there's still quite a long way to go. So some small steps have been taken, and then you get a big announcement that, you know, all of our efforts are going to go into this, and everyone's fighting for that goal. But the leadership messages sometimes are that, you know, we're in the midst of transformational change, and I just look back and think, no, we're not there yet. There's so much, I think, that the organisation wants to change, and people are going off in different departments and different silos trying to make that change happen, but we're a long way from getting to that end point.
And interesting you share that, because the journey from that point, I'll put a little pointer on screen to show the journey that you're looking to make from the start of the transformation, starting here and climbing to here. That can take time. That can sometimes take years. So if the senior executive are saying, yes, we're on transformational change, they're seeing the beginning of that journey, and they know they're only a quarter of the way there, and they've got 3/4 of the way to go. I can understand why they would say that. Look at the difference. This is interesting. Look at the difference between the end point of transformational change and the end point of step change. The difference is about where they are in relation to the dotted line. In other words, if you make transformational change, you are looking to get your organization to be competitive. And that's all. You're just looking to try to get back in the game because you've been well out of the game and potentially failing. Whereas step change and the intent of this is to try to steal a march. This is about getting ahead of your competition and having a short period of time, because people copy, don't they, where you've got something new to market, and you get a reputation for being, first and innovative and all those good things. So interesting as you're thinking about, well, how does this relate to my organization, to consider those things. Thank you, Sharon, for sharing. Liz, I'm keen to get some view from you as well.
Yeah, no problem. I'm very happy to share who I work for. I work for Crafted, which is a digital marketing agency based in Ipswich, and I've been there for 6 years. I've been rebranded. I used to be the HR and compliance manager. Now I'm the people and culture manager. But in essence, I do the same job. I think for me, I think it was very interesting. I remembered at my interview over 6 years ago, the CEO told me that they wanted to get into the top 100 of something to do. I didn't come from digital marketing. Yeah. I think we've done that.
Congratulations.
And the other thing, thank you. I don't know exactly what it is, but everybody gets very excited about awards at my place. The other thing that I also think is that we're still a privately owned company, and the board of directors, basically the people who own the company. And for me, part of the journey from 35 to almost 85 people in those 6 years has been about making sure that the vision that they had and the values that they have had as a board translated down. And I think I've hopefully in some part have helped that, along with also getting investors in people in and things like that, which are very, kind of align all of that and have conversations with people. And actually what I was saying is, like, people don't know which direction the company's going in, you need to tell them. Actually was then kind of backed up by some of the surveys that they did there. Yeah. So I think for us that, and I think we are now at a point where I've been saying for years, we have to grow our own. We can't just get people with experience off the shelf. Either that or we have to pay a lot of money. Finally, we've had a kind of, we call it the Gateway Scheme, and we've actually got 6 level entry jobs where we're going to actually train people up. We've done it very, very piecemeal over the years, but this time we've done a proper kind of like, we're investing for the future of our business. So that's why I think we are the step change. And as an organisation within the area, we're more attractive to people who perhaps work and live in this area and work in London, who might want to work for a large agency. So for me, that's what I meant by the step change. So we're kind of ahead of the curve a little bit.
And a couple of things you pointed out there, Liz, absolutely suggest that. I mean, partly the ranking that you talked about with the award thing that you're looking at. If you're winning or you're making progress beyond where you were before, so you're coming up in the rankings, then there's probably step change going on there. You're making improvements to move the organisation forward. And the other thing is as you say, it's about if you don't mind, sorry, just popping me on mute because there's a little bit of feedback coming back. There's a reputation that you're building as a better employer, someone, an organisation that you want to go and work at. And so again, the very way in which you're running your organisation steps up, and we're going to point to some of that in a moment. Thank you. Last quick word from Kat, if I can ask you to keep it brief, Kat, but I'd be keen to hear as well. It's the step change one that's it's the one where usually there's the most positive stuff going on from an HR perspective. So I was keen to hear about that. Kat, any feedback for us?
Yeah, I guess mine's a bit more historic because I'm currently on mat leave, but I worked for car sales. So as we came out of lockdown, we had done a lot of work behind the scenes of getting the team ready for a completely different way of working. We were doing digital sales, we were doing click and collects, but as a group of businesses, we were ahead of lots of the other car showrooms when we opened. We were ready to hit the ground running, and we opened as soon as we could. So I guess it was that big step change at that point, and supporting managers to support the teams, because most people were from home or not actually dealing with customers face to face, which was a completely different way of working for everybody.
Yeah. So again, that change has given you an advantage to be able to make that switch quickly. Yeah, good stuff. So thank you for sharing. So let's have a look at the outcome of this. If we're able to take stock of where do we want to be, and we think about it in the three terms that I've talked about: product or service leadership, our customer intimacy, and our operational excellence. If we get those three things in our mind as to, what would we like to look like? How would we like to be operating? Then we can start to build a plan for how we get there. And that plan may look like this. With us, there's our bike, that's our organization. There's us as our people riding it. And we want to get to that place. So that's how it looks. Okay, nice and simple, right? Here's what it really looks like in the world. We all know it looks nothing like that. It actually looks more like this. And so consequently, the question about what is strategy is sometimes easily demonstrated by these two pictures. What is strategy is the top one. The simple fact is that the journey from the bike to the flag is that's where we want to get to. But sometimes people get wrapped up in the individual stages and the changes. Yes, we might want to get the bike to the flag. As you can see, it's still there in the bottom picture. But there are many different stages and changes. In fact, we've dumped the bike at one point. We've got a ladder, and at another point, we've got a boat. All right, so things change in the strategy. I'm going to share a little bit about that with you in a second. But these are not strategy. The individual elements are, in fact, combined to achieve strategy, but they're not strategy itself. The overall picture of where we want to get to in the long term is strategy, in the same way as that's still here, but all the bits that go on underneath that, this picture hopefully helps us to be able to call out for strategy from our leaders, so that they are not talking about the tactics. They're absolutely fine to talk about them, but let's be clear, we're talking about tactics when we're dealing with tactics. They're the operational, day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month changes that we might need to make in order to bring our strategy alive. And that means that I've heard many operational leaders and managers saying, well, you know, the exec keep changing the goalposts. They think the strategy is this 1 minute, and then they want to change it to another. And I'm of a firm believer that as HR professionals, we have a shepherding role, a role model type role to perform, in as much as if we understand the picture that's on the screen right now, when we hear that kind of language, we should be, where possible, aiding in two ways to try to help with that. If we don't, then, you know, more often than not, the news can get out, or the word can get out that we're not really clear on what our strategy is, when in fact at exec level they may be very clear on what their strategy is, but it's getting lost and confused by a discussion around individual tactics. So the two things that I would be suggesting is that we do, as I think Liz, you were just sharing, is that we engage as much as we can at that top table with the exec team, to be understanding. So this is a receive piece, understanding, listening and understanding and interpreting what that strategy is. And if it's not clear, being bold and brave enough to call it out and say, no, hang on, I'm not clear on what that long-term aim is. Can you give us greater clarity on it? And the reason that we need that is to be able to turn around and share that absolutely, you know, crystal clear with everybody in the organization, and in a way that says this is the overarching strategy of the organization, and then be able to distill down into the tactics, the operational goals, the timelines, so that we can see. And the Cipd did it recently when they switched all of their qualifications. They gave us a timeline to look at. And as soon as you look at a timeline that spans over a year or so, you can go, oh, okay, you can see the various bits that are going to come together. But the overall strategy was to gear up, level up the qualifications, and to bring them into line with the Cipd profession map. So there's hopefully some clarity for you in that. How does this actually work in the real world? There's a nice picture that sort of shares how this happens. Strategy starts off with that best plan. That's the picture of the bike going to the map. Okay, that's what we think, sorry, to the flag. That's what we think we're going to do. Our intended strategy, our best plan, that's what we want to do. Okay, all right. Then we find in the real world, when we start to put that into practice, some of it works and some of it doesn't. So there's some of the strategy that with the, you know, the greatest intent, we might find it actually falls flat on its face. There also may be, you know, moments when that's happening where we go, oh, well, we've got to do something different. And we come up with some new ideas, what's called emergent strategy. And as emergent strategy helps us along our way, we eventually end up in the position where we're looking back at the journey we've been on, and we can see what our actual strategy has been as it's come alive, sometimes called our realized strategy or our pattern of actions. So I hope that picture sort of clarifies what strategy is. Hopefully that discussion's been clarifying for you. Again, I'd love to go into greater depth with plenty more examples and stuff with you. If you're interested in that, please do reach out. Happy to have a chat with people about that. But in our hour together, and we've got maybe, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes or so more, a quick thought about why do we need it? Indeed, HR can change the world, but often doesn't. And the reason for that is because the plan that's made, the strategy that is set, doesn't get executed correctly. And that can be simply because what I've just described is our responsibility to call out for that clarity of strategy and be able to share it with people and role model, bringing that strategy alive, doesn't happen. And so the strategy remains in the heads of the exec, and I've seen it before in documents, very flashy, wonderful looking documents, but it doesn't actually make its way into the behavior of the people in the organization. So that's our role in HR as well, not only to try to make that happen, but to call it out to the exec for them to play their part in leading the way inspirationally to share with us what the vision and the purpose of the organization is, so we can get behind that plan that we're aiming for. I will share with you one very, very brief story where of where that fell over somewhat sensationally. I won't name the organization, but it was in the property market, in the property industry. And the organization had been very clear about what its strategy was, because it was written down in a wonderful document and it was, you know, very clear what it wanted to achieve. But nobody had read it. And they were invited, about 200 senior managers were invited into a big conference where the strategy document was going to be shared by the chief executive of the organization to get everybody, you know, on board and on the same page and owning this strategy and it driving their behavior. And you would expect, therefore, that the owner would, or sorry, not the owner, the chief executive would have stood up and, you know, inspired people with a vision. And instead, what they did, to our surprise, was to drill straight down into the numbers and talk about the targets that everybody had to achieve. And it did completely the opposite. Nobody was interested in the strategy. They were just panicked about the target that they'd just been told they had to achieve. So there is a responsibility for HR to guide the executive who are focused on the performance of the business, maybe not always on the people. Some of the best ones are, but not always on the people, because they're looking at the other elements that make up strategy, and to remind them and call them out if they're not paying sufficient attention to the people aspects. Why? Well, because that's what helps bridge that gap between what the strategy looks like on paper and what execution looks like. Quick question. You could pop in the chat space the letter A or B. So here's two organizations. Organization A has a very ambitious strategy, very well planned out, and organization B has equally got a well planned out strategy, but it's far more conservative. So simple question, trick question. Which organization will be more successful? Pop your answers in the chat space, if you will. A or B, what do you think? Which is going to be more successful? The one with an ambitious strategy for success, or the one with the conservative strategy? Some good answers coming in. Both the same. Both. A, B. I think we've got all bases covered there then, haven't we? So it's a little bit like the answer that I gave you earlier, which is, you know, what is strategy? Well, it kind of depends on who you ask. And the answer to this question actually depends not on what the strategy is, but what's going on inside the organization. So if I now peel back each of these arrows and show you what each of those organizations look like inside, in other words, we're going to have a little look at what the culture's like. In organization A, whilst they've got a really ambitious strategy, you know, that's going to beat their competition, the culture in that organization is a little bit toxic. What we've got going on in here are people who are fighting one another. We've got disagreements, lack of clarity about the direction we're supposed to be heading in. The big arrow is the direction that the chief executive believes we should head in. But you can even see, if you look one arrow back, if you take the tip of the arrow being the exec team, and the further, you know, back in the arrow you go, the further down the tiers of the organization you're going, you can even see the number 2 and 3 are at odds with each other. But there's a bit of clickiness going on just behind that. Someone's changing their mind about what they believe or don't believe the organization is doing. You can see the carnage going on there. Whereas the organization that's got a more conservative strategy has, in fact, aligned its people behind the story. Which is going to be most successful now? It's a no-brainer, isn't it? We can see that the pain of that disorganization and lack of unity is going to cause that organization to struggle to succeed. Whereas with organization B, everybody playing together to help each other is likely. This is the very essence of great trust and teamwork and, you know, interdependence. If you've not come across that word before, please look it up. It is the holy grail of the likes of Stephen Covey with these 7 habits of highly effective people. Interdependence, not independence, interdependence is what you see on the right hand side. So yes, you know, lots of taps on B this time. So we've had to think about why we need it. It's to get our people to unite, to come together, to work more collaboratively in order to succeed together. And I think this is probably what the famous chap who worked on many organizations, Peter Drucker, was talking about when he talked about culture and its relationship with strategy. He said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's an interesting turn of phrase, because, you know, that example that I gave you a moment ago, that behavior by a chief executive in a room with 200 managers spoke volumes. Those 200 managers will then have gone back to their offices and demanded the numbers, as opposed to going back to the offices and sharing a strategy and inspiring people to want to do the numbers as a secondary thing. And this has been written about for ages. This book called The Fish Rots from the Head is, you know, over 10 years old now. So, you know, you can see this is not new stuff, but really many boards struggle with this as they strive to try to go for performance without thinking about how do you inspire people and take them with you, because they're the people who are going to actually make the performance happen. There were a couple of other books worth pointing you at, so that's worth a read. This one by a chap called Larry Sen has a wonderful picture in it which demonstrates what those jaws of culture chewing up strategy for breakfast looks like. You can see them there. So it doesn't matter on the left hand side, it doesn't matter whether you've got you know, a restructure, a merger, any of these changes that might go on. If you've got too much of the cultural barrier list that's at the top of the page alive, or you've got a lack of the positive cultural aspects that are at the bottom, bias fraction, meaning proactive people, trust, openness, teamwork, can-do attitude, if they're missing, then all of those strategic initiatives, none of those are going to work very well, if at all. The way to deal with it is to home in on, and this is what HR very often is focused on, isn't it? And this is tangible action we can take, is to focus in on the turf issues, the resistance change, that type of stuff at the top, and work hard with the exec team to eradicate it. If we don't, then what we're likely to see is a toxic culture. If we do, then by eradicating the top and building the bottom, we kind of create a slightly different picture where those change initiatives become like a springboard to higher results in those areas. And that helps us pull together and unite as a team. So that's another book. It's about 2006. That one was produced. So well worth a read and a look if you're interested in developing that high performance culture. And a final book that I'll point at you, the most recent purchase I've seen is 2012, The Advantage, Patrick Lencioni, fantastic book. And what he's saying is, if you look at the left and right hand side of this slide, every organization to even survive these days must have its money in order. It's got to have a plan. It's got to sell a market what it does, and it's got to make good use of technology to be efficient, right? If we don't do that, we're kind of dead in the water. But if we do that, we're only at the starting line. And he calls those smart organizations. They're just doing what you must do to even be allowed to be in business. If you don't do those things, you're not going to survive. Where competitive advantage sits, and this is what he means by the advantage, competitive advantage sits, is in the HR space. It's about creating a healthy organization where everybody's not only being smart, because that doesn't take care of the people stuff, but they're looking at what's the morale like, what are the politics like, how can we overcome, you know, disagreements or character clash, how can we strive to create a culture of high productivity with our performance management systems, with our you know, our communication and regular you know, agile performance, if that's the sort of stuff that you want to do. And we create a workplace where you've got low turnover of employees and a great reputation on Glassdoor and all of that good stuff. So in essence, what we're talking about is we just need to do, as HR, we just need to do what the CIPD pops in this model. Encourage our executive to operate in a principles-led way. We need to provide evidence to show why that would be the case. But you know what? There's a ton of that out there to prove it. It's a no-brainer to do this stuff. Those books that I've shared with you alone have countless case studies of where organizations in virtually every industry have either succeeded or failed on whether they've got their HR strategy to support and work in concert with the overriding strategy. So I hope you've enjoyed this. It's 8 o'clock. I do want to give you one last thing to do just for 5 minutes or so, and that is to think about the next steps. And by doing so, what I'm suggesting is, you can attend a webinar like this, you can go on courses. The truth is, and this was a study done by the Centre for Creative Leadership, that only 10% of our learning comes from these kind of interventions. So as much as maybe, I hope you've enjoyed this chat and the interaction that we've had this evening, only 10% of our learning comes from here. 20% of our learning comes from our conversations with other people, and as we formulate the ideas about what we want to do, how we build that up and explore it. But the real power, the real impact of development like this comes from when we go and practically take action. And so we're looking here at, 70% of our learning comes from actually going and trying these things out. And that's why I would encourage you to, attend things like this, discuss them with your peers, discuss them in forums on the CIPD, but most importantly, go and take action. So we're going to do one final quick 5 minutes in some breakout rooms, have a chat with each other. We'll make them slightly bigger rooms, so there's like 4 or 5 of you in each room, but just have a little conversation. What would you take from this evening to your board? What would you take from this discussion about strategy back into your organization in order to improve how effectively it operates? And then we'll come back together in 5 minutes just to wrap up. So I'll do the breakout rooms again. This time I'm only going to do 5 of them. So there's a couple more of you in each room. The rooms are open. Back here in a few minutes time. See you very shortly. Off you go. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Hopefully I'm sorry to interrupt your conversations, because you've probably been going, well, actually, I think I might try this, or here's a challenge. So sorry to interrupt that, but we are at time. I hope you found it a useful hour. It's flown for me, so I hope it has for you as well. Again, I'd encourage you to think about how you can lean on the actions that sit within the profession map. I mean, it's a fantastic resource. I use it a lot for the students that we're putting through the qualifications through the CIPD. But there's some really good content on there. So please do lean into the case studies and the examples. I'm going to be the last to leave tonight. So I did say there'd be time for Q&A at the end. So I'm more than happy to remain and answer any questions you might have. Thank you ever so much for your contributions this evening and your time. I wish you the very best of luck out there. But if you want to get in touch, if you want to stay here, I'll be the last to leave. So stay. I'm happy to stay as long as you like to discuss anything if you'd like to. But otherwise, good luck out there, everybody, and wishing you the best. So I was just saying to Amanda, Dawn, I do typically find there's a person or two sometimes who do want to just ask a couple of questions and engage at the back end. And we usually let the majority of people go, and then there's 1 or 2 at the end that have a chat through. I'm wondering, Katie, that might be you. I'm just having a look at your smiley faces there. Share away. It'd be lovely to have a chat with you.
It's a bit of a random quick query. Strategy in general, is it always a 1-sentence key thing, or is it a paragraph, or is it a whole paper?
So it's a great question, first of all, and you're absolutely right to ask it. Einstein once said, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough.
Okay.
Now, you can absolutely have a strategy defined in all of the ways you've just described. You can have a 48-page document with, tons of detail about how we're going to get the bike from there to there and what utopia looks like, right? You can have all the thinking that the board have gone through, the painstaking meetings that they've had. Of course you can. But if that's what it is, nobody's going to read it. It's too long. You can have it, and it might well be a definition of what your strategy is in detail. And if I was the CEO of that organization going, well, we've done it, here it is, why isn't it working? I would want to work with that individual and go, it's because it's too long, right? It's absolutely correct. It defines what your strategy is, but now you've got to wordsmith it down and think about how do you get that into the minds of people so they buy into it and actually work with it. And so, you know, if you can distill that down into bite-sized chunks or indeed into a strap line, then you've got something that can move people. The danger with the strap line one is that if it's too short and sweet and simplistic, then it can leave people feeling that it doesn't really mean anything on the ground on a day-to-day basis. You get where I'm coming from, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
with that, it needs to be very, very carefully wordsmithed to mean something to the people in that organization. Hence the example I gave earlier with Nike saying 2 words, crush Adidas. NASA did it as well, really well, right? NASA, they distilled their strategy for the next 100 years, right, into 2 words. I mean, like, but they made it really relevant. It was conquer space.
Yeah.
And now if you're working at NASA, you know every day we're just going to do that next thing, because the big overarching thing is we need to be able to move from planet to planet easily and freely and populate. That's conquering space. You can go where you like. It's clear. They've really, really nailed it. So does that answer your question? That they're all relevant descriptions, but they have different purposes.
And my last just follow-on query is, would you say that strategy is the same as mission, a mission statement? Is that the same sort of thing, or is it different?
No, it's different. So NASA's a great example of that.
Okay.
Their strategy was to conquer space.
Yeah.
The mission was to put man on the moon and bring him back in the 1960s.
Okay.
It's a stepping stone. A mission is a tactic. It's a part of the journey, right?
Okay.
When we hear about mission statements, sometimes they can be quite a big mission. I mean, that's not a small mission, right? You might feel like you are kind of conquering space to be able to leave the planet and go somewhere and come back again. But have you conquered the universe, or have you just conquered a rock orbiting your planet? You're not all the way there yet. So missions can feel quite big, but let's be really clear. A mission statement, and we're talking technically now, a mission statement is not the same as strategy. And very often, sometimes it's chief executives who call out their mission statement as that's what we're all going after. And they're stating it as if it is the overarching strategy. And it's just misnamed. You know, if it's that big and long-term and overarching, then it's not actually a mission statement. It's bigger than that. That is your strategy. We're into semantics, and does it matter? Technically, yes. Operationally, no, on one condition. If it takes everybody with you and you get there, it's working, right?
Yeah.
If it doesn't take everybody there and it confuses people, then yes, it really matters a lot, and you need to get it right, which is more often than not is when I get called in to help people go, all right, well, can we all just start talking the same language about what strategy is, what it isn't, and what it looks like here? Because then when we're on all the same page, all those arrows start to line up and we go, and it makes it easier for people to call out what help they need, and when people are inadvertently hindering each other's performance, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, perfect. That makes sense. Thank you.
Pleasure. Heather and Joanna, I can see you're still here. I don't know if you are actually still here. You're on mute. If you want to come off mute and say hi, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
I didn't have any questions. I was just really intrigued to sort of hear the other questions. It's the first time I've attended one of these. Okay. And that last question, what you just said, really just summed up a lot of things for me, because I was just trying to sit there and think, what is my company strategy? And then is it the mission statement or our vision? But thank you. I really appreciate that. I've got some questions to ask when I go back tomorrow.
Yeah. So, and by all means, reach out to me if you want help with that. I consult. There's no charge for chatting. It's not, it's just an opportunity to explore what is possible in your organization. So, if you want some help, please do reach out.
Oh, I appreciate it. It's such a big organization, and sometimes I just think things get lost as it comes down. We're all branded. I'm in my own brand, in my own sort of region as well. So it's like what I always thought was strategy clearly isn't, because that's just our brand strategy. So it's not a strategy. Yeah.
These words get bandied about, don't they? And it's okay. I mean, I'm not saying they're wrong to say it's a brand strategy. It might well be, but all you need to know is that that's part of the tactic to getting to a bigger overall place for the organization. And actually, that's important for you to understand. You need to know what that overarching thing is, because that's what puts fuel in your belly. And if you're looking to get people to go with you and in your teams and in other teams, if you're in HR, quite often we're matrix managing people in other teams, right? The way that you can inspire others who you don't directly line manage is to keep referring back to the overarching strategy that we're all pulling together to achieve. And people, when they're reminded of that, quite often their response will be, yeah, actually, you're right. Yeah, and then you get help and you can influence people to pull together more. It's powerful stuff.
That is. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Pleasure. We have, I don't think anybody left with us other than Heather and Katie. I think they're just dropping off now. So Dawn, Amanda, is there anything else you need from me this evening?
No, thank you very much for your wisdom. It's always welcome as usual.
Pleasure.
Yeah,
Good fun.
it's been a great session. Thank you very much, Tony. And I can see from the comments in the chat box that everybody's really enjoyed the session. So thank you.